The morning light over Portland had a way of softening the edges of everything it touched. It spilled through the tall glass windows of the little Sunrise Bakery, painting the worn wooden floors in hues of gold and honey. The scent of fresh bread drifted into the street, warm, comforting, the kind that made strangers linger by the door just a little longer. Mr. Thompson, the old baker, was humming softly as he stacked loaves behind the counter, unaware that in a few seconds, his small bakery would become the stage for something unforgettable. The door creaked open, and two small figures stepped inside. The twins, Hazel and Grace Bennett, looked out of place among the neatly dressed morning customers. Their jackets were thin, sleeves frayed from being rolled up too many times. Hazel, the older by a few minutes, held her sister's hand tightly, her chin lifted in a way that made her look braver than she felt. Grace's eyes darted around, wide and uncertain, like she was afraid they might be asked to leave. They walked slowly toward the counter, the bell above the door still echoing faintly behind them. Mr. Thompson noticed them and offered a tired but kind smile. "Good morning, girls. What can I get you today?" Hazel's fingers twisted around the hem of her sleeve. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Can we—" "Pay later, please." The bakery went still. Even the sound of the coffee machine seemed to pause. Mr. Thompson frowned, his kind eyes softening. "Pay later?" Grace nodded quickly, her small voice barely a whisper. "Our mom's sick at home. We just need one loaf of bread. We'll come back tomorrow, we promise." The words hung in the air, fragile, desperate, impossibly sincere. A man near the back of the shop turned his head slightly, pretending not to listen. Another customer looked away, uncomfortable. Mr. Thompson hesitated, glancing at the other patrons before sighing. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he said gently. "We don't keep tabs here." "I wish I could, but—" Hazel bit her lip, fighting the sting in her eyes. "Please, sir." "We haven't eaten since yesterday." Grace's hand tightened around hers, silent tears forming at the corners of her lashes. And that was when a voice broke through the silence. "How much is the bread?" It came from near the doorway, calm, low, steady. Everyone turned. A man in a tailored charcoal coat stood there, one hand adjusting his sleeve. Adrian Miles looked like he belonged to another world entirely. The kind of man who carried himself with quiet authority, his shoes polished, his expression unreadable. He hadn't meant to speak. Something in the girls' voices had reached through the noise of his busy, detached life and pulled him into this small, fragile moment. Mr. Thompson blinked. 325. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and took out a crisp $20 bill. He placed it on the counter without hesitation. "Cover theirs. And keep the change." Hazel froze. Grace looked up at him with disbelief. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, her voice so small it was almost lost beneath the hum of the bakery. "We'll pay you back when our mom's better." Adrian shook his head, his eyes softening for the first time in years. "No need. Just take care of her." Mr. Thompson quietly wrapped the loaf and handed it to Hazel, who held it as though it were made of gold. The girls turned toward the door, pausing at the sunlight streaming in through the glass. Grace looked back once, offering a shy smile that reached all the way to her eyes, a smile that made something inside Adrian shift, almost painfully. As they disappeared into the light, the world seemed to resume around him, the sound of cups clinking, the rustle of paper bags, the smell of cinnamon and yeast. But for Adrian, time had stopped. He stood still, his hand resting on the counter, feeling the echo of their words. "Can we pay later?" He didn't know why those words mattered so much, but they did. They carried the weight of something he thought he had long buried. The memory of needing, of asking, of being turned away. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that in a small bakery on Pine Street, something quiet but irreversible had begun. For the first time in a very long time, Adrian Miles, the man who thought he had everything, felt the ache of something missing. Something human. The world outside the bakery was a blur of motion, car horns, chatter, and the endless rhythm of Portland waking up. But to Adrian Miles, it all sounded distant, muffled, as if he were standing behind glass. The scent of bread still clung to his coat, the echo of those tiny voices still circling in his head. "Sir, please, can we pay later?" He walked briskly toward his black sedan, his polished shoes clicking against the wet pavement. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. Coffee, quick meeting, routine day. Instead, something inside him felt unsettled, like a clock that had started ticking again after years of silence. He drove without direction, letting the city swallow him. At a red light, his reflection appeared in the windshield. Sharp suit, calm eyes, everything in its place. Yet beneath that surface, the image cracked. He saw not a man of success, but a stranger haunted by the sound of hunger. By the time he reached his office tower, the morning haze had lifted. The marble lobby gleamed, his name etched on the glass wall. Miles Investments, bold and confident. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and his assistant Ethan Cruz greeted him at the top floor with the usual efficiency. "Morning, sir. You've got the Harborview proposal at 10, call with Tokyo at 11, and lunch with Mr. Hanley." "Cancel it," Adrian interrupted. Ethan blinked. "Canceled lunch?" "All of it. Reschedule everything for later this week." "Everything?" Adrian didn't look up from his reflection in the window. "Yes, everything." Ethan hesitated, sensing something was off but knowing better than to ask. Adrian wasn't the kind of man you questioned. Not when he built an empire from nothing. Not when every decision he made was precise, profitable, cold. But that morning, the man behind the glass wasn't the same. There was a heaviness in his silence, something unfamiliar. He tried to drown himself in paperwork, but the numbers blurred. He'd close his eyes for a moment, and there they were again, the twins. Hazel's brave eyes, Grace's trembling smile, the way they held on to each other like the world might disappear if they let go. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Why can't I shake this?" It wasn't guilt exactly. It was memory. He could almost smell the same bread from his childhood, the one his mother used to buy when there was barely enough left to pay rent. He remembered the nights when hunger made the house feel colder, when he'd promise himself that one day he'd never need to beg again. And he didn't. But in that promise, somewhere along the way, he had lost something vital. By late afternoon, the city outside his window glowed under a silver drizzle. He picked up his phone. "Ethan," he said quietly, "I need you to find something for me." Ethan paused mid-typing. "Of course. What are we looking for?" "The two girls from the Sunrise Bakery." "This morning." "They asked for bread." Ethan frowned. "You want me to track down two kids?" Adrian's voice was calm but carried an unfamiliar edge. "Yes, I want to know who they are, where they live, everything." Ethan exhaled softly. "That's unusual for you. Just do it." He hung up before Ethan could respond. That night, Adrian stood alone on his penthouse balcony. The city stretched out like a field of stars below him. The rain had stopped, leaving droplets clinging to the railing. He could hear faint echoes from the streets. Laughter, engines, the hum of distant life. But they all sounded far away. His world, though filled with glass and light, felt empty. In his hand was a small brown paper bag, a loaf of bread he'd bought on his way home, the same kind from the bakery. He didn't know why he bought it. He wasn't hungry. Maybe he wanted to understand what that bread had meant to those girls, what it had meant to him. Once upon a time, he tore a small piece and tasted it. Simple, ordinary. Yet something in it cracked open an old memory, his mother's voice, gentle but tired, whispering, "We'll eat tomorrow, sweetheart. Just sleep." He hadn't thought of her in years. She'd died before she could see the empire he built, before she could know he kept his promise, never to need anyone again. But standing there, the bread soft in his hand, he wondered if maybe she'd been right when she told him that needing someone wasn't weakness. It was being human. The next morning, Ethan returned with a file. "It took some digging," he said, sliding it onto the desk. "Their names are Hazel and Grace Bennett. They live with their mother, Claire Bennett, over on the east side. The building's old, barely holding together. She works in the laundry department at St. Mary's Hospital. Single mom, no insurance. Health issues. Adrian opened the folder. A photo of the twins stared back at him, smiling despite the exhaustion in their eyes. Their mother Claire stood behind them, her expression weary but full of quiet strength. Ethan hesitated. There's more. She's behind on rent. A few weeks, maybe a month away from eviction. Adrian didn't speak. He traced his finger along the edge of the photograph, feeling the paper tremble slightly beneath his touch. Do you want me to contact someone? Ethan asked carefully. No, Adrian said. Not yet. That night, Adrian drove to the east side of Portland. The sky was dim, clouds thick with rain again. He parked across from a crumbling apartment building, engine running, headlights dimmed. Through a cracked curtain on the second floor, he could see faint light flickering. Inside, Claire Bennett was folding uniforms, her shoulders slumped. The twins sat at the table, coloring on scraps of paper, laughing quietly despite everything. Adrian watched, motionless. The glass fogged from his breath, his hand gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. He could buy the whole building if he wanted. He could fix everything with one phone call. But he didn't move. He just watched. For the first time in his life, the man who had everything saw what it meant to truly have enough. And though he didn't know it yet, that quiet decision to stay, to watch instead of turn away, would be the beginning of something far greater and far more dangerous than charity. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness plants a seed that refuses to die, and when it grows, it changes everything. Rain whispered against the windshield as Adrian's car idled beneath a flickering streetlight. Across the narrow street, the Bennett apartment building leaned tiredly into the night, its cracked paint and rusted fire escapes speaking of years that had worn it down. The glow from a second-floor window spilled out weakly, a patch of light in a city that had forgotten corners like this existed. Inside that window, Adrian Miles watched a world he didn't belong to. Claire Bennett, the mother of the two little girls from the bakery, moved slowly around her cramped kitchen. She wore a faded uniform, the kind used by hospital workers, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. Every few moments she'd pause to catch her breath, a hand pressed to her chest. A small cough racked her shoulders, but she pushed through it, stirring a pot of soup, setting out 2 chipped bowls. At the small table, Hazel and Grace sat cross-legged on their chairs, doing homework under a lamp that buzzed faintly. Hazel's brow furrowed as she read aloud, trying to sound confident. Grace leaned on her sister's shoulder, her eyes already drooping from exhaustion. Adrian could hear none of it, but the sight alone hit harder than he expected. It was the simplicity, the quiet rhythm of love and survival, that unsettled him. He had walked into boardrooms where billions shifted hands, but never had he seen something as fragile and as strong as that small family clinging to each other in the dim light. A stray thought crossed his mind. What if I hadn't stopped at that bakery? Would anyone else have noticed them? The idea gnawed at him as he drove home. He tried to push it aside, tried to remind himself that people suffered every day, that this was not his world to fix. But guilt is a persistent shadow, and it followed him all the way back to the top floor of his glass tower. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window watching rain trail down the cityscape, his reflection split by streaks of water. The man staring back looked composed, successful, but hollow. For the first time in years, Adrian felt the ache of purpose unfulfilled. The next morning, he called Ethan, his assistant. Ethan, if someone needed help, anonymously, how would you do it? Ethan blinked at the question, unsure if he'd heard right. Financial help? Yes, groceries, rent, maybe medical. That's not exactly your usual portfolio, sir. Adrian gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Consider it a new investment. Ethan didn't ask more. Within a day, deliveries began to appear outside the Bennett's door. Boxes filled with food, books for the twins, and a handwritten note that simply said, "From someone with kind eyes." When Hazel found the note, she ran to her mother, eyes wide with wonder. "Mom, look! The man from the bakery sent this. He remembered us." Claire frowned, her pride prickling before gratitude could surface. "No, honey. People don't just send things for free. But what if he's just kind?" Grace asked softly, her voice filled with quiet hope. Claire sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she unpacked the food. "There's always a reason, sweetheart." That night, after the girls fell asleep, Claire sat by the window. She traced the raindrops on the glass and whispered to herself, "There's no such thing as kindness without cost." Across town, Adrian was doing the same thing, sitting by his own window, wondering if kindness, when given without expectation, could ever be enough to heal something inside a stranger. He didn't realize he was trying to heal himself too. The following week, he returned to the east side, parking farther down the street this time. He saw Hazel and Grace coming home from school, their backpacks nearly as big as they were. They stopped at a small grocery store, counting coins carefully on the counter. The cashier smiled gently and waved off a few cents they were short. Adrian watched from his car, his chest tightening. When they reached their apartment, Hazel fished a key from her pocket. The way she looked over her shoulder before unlocking the door spoke volumes. Not fear exactly, just the reflex of someone who'd grown used to uncertainty. He stayed there until the lights went out. He told himself he'd leave after that, but he didn't. He sat in silence, as if some invisible thread tied him to that window, to that family, to the ache of something he couldn't quite name. By the weekend, he decided to step beyond the shadows. He went to the Sunrise Bakery early, just as Mr. Thompson flipped the open sign. "Morning, Mr. Miles," the baker greeted, surprised. "Back for another loaf?" Adrian hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, and something else." He slid an envelope across the counter. "Use this to start a fund, for anyone who can't afford bread." "No names, no records," Mr. Thompson blinked, eyes moistening. "You sure?" Adrian nodded. "Keep it simple. Just kindness without the paperwork," the baker smiled faintly. "There's good in this city after all." Adrian left without another word. But later that day, when he drove past the Bennett apartment again, something unexpected happened. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he saw Claire on the front steps, coughing violently into a handkerchief. She steadied herself on the railing, trying not to let the girls see her falter. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. Hazel noticed anyway and rushed to her side, small arms wrapping around her waist. Adrian's instincts screamed to intervene. But something held him back. Her pride, maybe, or his fear of being seen as a savior. Instead, he made a silent promise to himself. If things got worse, he wouldn't wait anymore. That night, as lightning flashed over Portland, Adrian sat in the dark, hands clasped, waiting for a call that would never come. Because fate had already decided it would come from somewhere else. From two small girls, running through the rain when their world began to collapse, and when it did, Adrian Miles's carefully built walls would finally break. He just didn't know it yet. The ambulance tore through the Portland night, sirens slicing through the rain like grief through silence. Inside, the lights flickered red and white against metal and fear. Adrian Miles sat wedged between two paramedics, his expensive coat soaked through, his hand gripping the small fingers of Hazel Bennett, who refused to let go. On the stretcher beside them, Claire Bennett lay pale and unmoving, oxygen mask fogging faintly with each shallow breath. Grace, trembling in Adrian's lap, pressed her face against his shoulder, whispering through tears, "Please don't let her die, sir." "Please!" Adrian's throat tightened. He had no words, just a promise he couldn't bear to break. "She won't," he said quietly, voice rough with something that wasn't certainty but hope. "I'm here now." The paramedic across from him looked up. "She's in bad shape. Pneumonia, most likely. Your family." Adrian didn't hesitate. "Tonight I am." The words left his mouth before he could think. They hung heavy in the air, half truth, half destiny. When they arrived at St. Mary's Medical Center, chaos swallowed them whole. Nurses rushed forward, voices overlapping. wheels squealing against tile. Adrian followed the stretcher through the automatic doors until a nurse held up her hand. "Sir, you can't go in there." Hazel clung tighter to him. But he knelt in front of the girls, brushing Grace's wet hair from her face. "Listen to me. They're helping her now. That's the best thing that could happen. You two stay with me, all right?" Hazel's voice cracked. "We don't have any money." Adrian stood, his expression unreadable. "Then I'll handle it." He turned to the desk, pulling his wallet from his coat, his voice steady as he spoke to the admitting nurse. "Put everything under my name. All costs, all treatments. No delays." The nurse blinked. "Are you related?" Adrian met her eyes. "Yes," he said softly. "In the ways that matter." The twins sat in the waiting area, huddled together under his coat. The storm outside beat against the glass like it wanted in. The minutes stretched, long and cruel, until at last the doctor appeared, a woman in her 50s, fatigue lining her face. "She's stable for now," she said, looking between Adrian and the girls. "Severe pneumonia. Another few hours and it might have been too late." Grace burst into tears. Hazel buried her face in Adrian's side, her small body shaking. Adrian felt the breath leave his lungs. Relief and guilt mixed into something heavy and human. "Can we see her?" Hazel asked. The doctor nodded. "One at a time." Inside the hospital room, the steady beeping of machines filled the silence. Claire's face was drained of color, her breathing slow but even. Adrian stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker beyond the rain. Behind him, Hazel placed a small drawing on her mother's nightstand, a picture of their family holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Grace climbed onto the chair beside the bed, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You can rest now. Mom, the man from the bakery helped." Claire didn't stir. But Adrian saw something soften in her expression, a flicker maybe, a sign that she could hear them. Hours passed before exhaustion finally pulled the twins into sleep. Adrian draped his coat over them and sank into the chair by the window. For years he had stayed awake for deals, deadlines, and acquisitions. But this night was different. This night, he stayed awake because leaving felt unthinkable. Sometime before dawn, Claire stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding them until the sterile light of the hospital room came into focus. She saw the IV in her arm, the monitors beside her bed, and then Adrian. Sitting quietly, elbows on his knees, head bowed, her voice was a rasp. "You're still here?" He looked up, startled. "You scared them half to death." She blinked, her memory returning in flashes. The rain, the dizziness, the girls' screams. "The twins, are they—" "They're fine," he said gently. "Sleeping right over there." Her gaze softened, finding their small shapes curled together on the couch. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," she murmured. "This isn't your responsibility." "I didn't have a choice," Adrian replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "They came to me. They trusted me." She turned her face away, staring at the ceiling. "I don't understand you. Why do you care?" He paused for a long moment, searching for the right words. "Because once, a long time ago, someone cared about me when they didn't have to. And I never said thank you." Her lips parted, but no words came. The rain against the window filled the silence that followed. When the doctor returned that morning, she looked surprised to see Adrian still there. "She'll recover," she said. "It'll take time, but she's strong." Adrian nodded, gratitude flickering across his face. "That's all that matters." Later, when the twins woke, Hazel stretched and rubbed her eyes. "Is Mom awake?" "She is," Adrian said with a small smile. "Go say good morning." The girls rushed to her bedside, their laughter soft but bright enough to fill the sterile room. Claire reached out weakly, stroking their hair. "You two saved me?" Hazel grinned. "No, Mom, he did." She pointed to Adrian. "He came for us." Claire's eyes met his, uncertain, grateful but guarded. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," Adrian replied, standing. "Just get better," she hesitated. "You'll go now, I suppose?" He looked at the girls, then back at her. Not yet, and he didn't. He stayed through the day, through the endless hospital meals and visiting hours and quiet conversations that blurred one day into the next. Each evening, as the city lights blinked awake, Adrian would bring small things: fresh fruit, books for the twins, a blanket that didn't scratch. He told no one. Not Ethan, not the board, not a soul. By the fourth night, Claire looked stronger, her color returning. She caught him watching her and said quietly, "You're different when you're here." "How so?" "You look human," he laughed softly. "I'm learning." She studied him for a long moment. "I used to think people like you didn't feel anything. You make it look so easy from the outside." He glanced at her, his expression unguarded for the first time. "It's not easy. It's just lonely." The air between them shifted, something unspoken forming, fragile but real. The world outside their little room might have been loud and cold, but in here, something small and warm had begun to grow. That night, after the girls fell asleep again, Claire whispered, "Why did you really come back that morning? You could have forgotten us." Adrian turned to her, eyes steady. "Because I couldn't. Because sometimes the people who need saving remind us we still have a heart." He rose to leave, pausing at the door. "Adrian," she said softly. "Stay until morning?" He hesitated only a second before nodding. "As long as you need me to." And as the rain tapped gently against the hospital window, the man who had once lived in glass towers sat in a dimly lit room beside a woman who had nothing. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Miles felt whole. But what none of them knew was that this was only the calm before the real storm, one that would test the meaning of kindness, loyalty, and love in ways none of them were prepared for. The first morning after Claire Bennett's hospitalization dawned cold and gray, the kind of Portland morning where fog drifted between the hospital towers like ghosts. Inside room 317, the soft rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound that dared to interrupt the silence. Adrian Miles sat slouched in the stiff visitor's chair, his tie undone, his eyes red from a night without sleep. He hadn't meant to stay. He had promised himself he would leave once she was stable, once the twins had someone to comfort them. But every time he tried to stand, something in him refused to move. The door creaked open, and a nurse peeked inside. "You've been here all night, sir?" He nodded absently. She smiled faintly. "She's lucky." "Not everyone gets someone who stays." The words lingered long after she left. Adrian turned his gaze back to Claire, her breathing slow but stronger than before. Her hair was loose now, a strand falling across her cheek. He wanted to brush it aside but stopped himself. There were boundaries he didn't yet understand, and lines he feared to cross. A small rustle drew his attention. The twins were curled up together on the couch, sleeping beneath his coat. Hazel's hand rested protectively on her sister's shoulder, even in sleep. The sight was so fragile it hurt. Claire stirred around mid-morning. Her eyelids fluttered open, confusion flashing across her face as she realized where she was. Her gaze shifted to the window, where sunlight struggled through gray clouds, then to Adrian, silent, weary, still there. "You're still here," she whispered. He straightened, embarrassed. "I thought someone should be." "You didn't have to." "I know." She studied him for a long moment, the corners of her mouth softening. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. "People with money, they don't stay." Adrian looked down at his hands. "Maybe I'm not very good at being rich." A faint smile touched her lips, but it faded quickly into a cough. Adrian jumped up, pouring water into a cup. She waved him off weakly. "I'm fine." He didn't believe her, but he didn't argue. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was something else. Familiar, maybe. Two people who'd spent too much of their lives pretending they didn't need anyone. When Ethan, his assistant, called later that morning, Adrian stepped into the hallway. "You've been off the grid for 3 days," Ethan said. "Do you want me to push your meetings again?" "Clear the week." There was a pause. "You're serious?" "I am," Ethan hesitated. "You're staying with them, aren't you?" Adrian exhaled. "Yeah, I guess I am." Ethan's tone softened. "Then do it right. Don't just write checks. Be there. Adrian hung up without replying, his jaw tight. Be there. The words echoed like an instruction he'd never been taught. Back in the room, Hazel was reading aloud from a picture book, her voice bright and careful. Grace giggled at the funny parts, her small feet swinging off the chair. Claire watched them with tired but peaceful eyes. Adrian stood by the door, unseen for a moment, watching the way sunlight caught in their hair. It hit him then, something so simple, yet so foreign, that this, what he was seeing, was what home looked like. Days blurred into each other. Adrian became a quiet fixture in their lives. He fetched breakfast from Sunrise Bakery every morning. 2 muffins, 1 cup of cocoa, 1 coffee with just a hint of sugar, the way Claire liked it. He helped Hazel practice spelling, listened to Grace's soft humming, and sat through doctor updates like a man who had something to lose. It was strange. For the first time in years, Adrian wasn't measuring time in profits or contracts. He was measuring it in small human things, the way Grace's laughter filled the sterile air, the way Hazel squeezed his hand when she was scared, the way Claire's color slowly returned. On the 4th evening, Claire insisted he go home. "You've done more than enough," she said, sitting up straighter in bed. "You don't owe us anything." Adrian smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But I don't feel like I'm doing this out of debt. Then why?" she asked softly. He paused, searching for the right words. "Because being around your girls reminds me what it's like to feel something real again." Claire looked at him for a long moment, her eyes glistening. "I used to think people like you, people with money, didn't feel anything at all." He chuckled quietly. "It's the biggest lie we tell ourselves, that success makes us whole." Her gaze softened. "Then what does?" He looked at her, really looked at her. The moments we think don't matter. A hush fell between them, the kind that didn't need filling. Outside, the rain had stopped, replaced by a quiet drizzle tapping gently against the window. When Claire was discharged a few days later, Adrian insisted on driving them home. Hazel and Grace chattered endlessly in the back seat, filling the air with laughter that made something in his chest ache. "Mom says you're our guardian angel," Hazel said suddenly. Claire blushed. "I did not say that." "Yes, you did," Grace giggled. "You said he showed up when we needed help." Adrian smiled through the rearview mirror. "I'm no angel," he said softly. "Just someone who took a wrong turn at the right time." The apartment hadn't changed. Cracked walls, flickering lights, but the feeling inside it had. Adrian carried the groceries to the kitchen, fixed a broken curtain rod without being asked, and smiled when Grace offered him a cookie that was more dough than flour. "You really don't know how to leave, do you?" Claire teased from the doorway. He turned, wiping his hands on a towel. "Maybe I don't want to." That night, as the girls fell asleep on the couch, Claire lingered by the window. The city lights reflected in her eyes. "Why are you really doing this, Adrian?" she asked quietly. "People like you don't just appear in lives like ours." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the table where the girls' drawings were spread out, crayon hearts, suns, smiling faces. He touched one gently. "Because once, when I was their age, I stood in a bakery and asked if I could pay later." Claire froze. He nodded slowly. "And someone told me no. I swore I'd never ask again. But I think part of me was waiting for someone to say yes." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then softly, "So you decided to become that yes for someone else." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Maybe that's the only way we heal." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was the kind that felt like peace, like understanding, and as the clock ticked past midnight, a man who once lived above the clouds sat in a worn-out apartment surrounded by laughter and warmth. For the first time in years, Adrian Miles didn't feel alone, but outside in the dark alley behind the building, a shadow lingered. The landlord, a man named Victor Crane, was counting overdue slips under the flicker of a broken light. When he saw the stranger's sleek car parked near the curb, his eyes narrowed. "Harborview plates," he muttered. "That's not someone from around here." He smiled. A cruel, knowing smile. "Looks like the Bennetts found themselves a sponsor." And just like that, The quiet peace that had begun to bloom was about to be tested, because in the world Claire lived in, kindness always came with consequences. The real storm, it seemed, hadn't ended with the rain. It had only changed its shape. The days that followed felt almost unreal, like a fragile calm stretched over something waiting to break. For the first time in months, Claire Bennett woke to sunlight instead of coughing fits. The twins' laughter filled the apartment again, their chatter spilling into every corner. The smell of cinnamon and coffee drifted through the small kitchen, where Adrian Miles leaned awkwardly against the counter, sleeves rolled up, trying not to burn toast. Hazel giggled as smoke curled from the toaster. "You're supposed to press cancel, not hit it like it owes you money." Adrian smirked, eyes narrowing playfully. "In my world, everything listens when I hit it." Grace covered her mouth to stifle laughter. "Not the toaster, sir." Even Claire couldn't help but laugh, softly at first, then fully, the sound filling the room like music he didn't know he'd been missing. It was the kind of morning that felt like a dream. But Adrian knew better than anyone how easily dreams could collapse. Later that week, he met Ethan at a downtown cafe. The rain had returned, soft and steady. Ethan set a folder on the table. "You've been spending a lot of time on the east side," he said carefully. "People are starting to ask questions." Adrian stirred his coffee without looking up. "Let them ask." Ethan frowned. "The board doesn't care about charity. They care about optics. You disappear from meetings. They think you're losing focus." Adrian's tone stayed calm. "Maybe I am. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Ethan leaned in, lowering his voice. "You're changing, Adrian. I don't know if that's good for business." Adrian finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "It's good for me." He pushed the folder aside, uninterested in whatever deal was inside. Somewhere between the bakery and the hospital, he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross, the one between living and existing. Still, change never came without consequence. That afternoon, when Adrian returned to the Bennett's apartment, something felt wrong. The landlord's car, a dented black sedan, was parked near the curb. Through the cracked door, raised voices drifted into the hallway. "I told you I'll have it by next week." Claire's voice was firm but weary. "You said that last month," the man growled. "No rent, no home. You think your charity friend's gonna save you forever?" Adrian stepped into the doorway, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Is there a problem here?" The landlord turned, sizing him up. "Who's asking?" Adrian's gaze was cold, his posture controlled. "Someone who doesn't appreciate threats," the man sneered. "And who are you, her knight in shining armor?" "You think your money scares me?" Adrian didn't answer. He reached into his coat pocket and placed an envelope on the counter, thick with cash. "That's 3 months' rent plus damages. You'll give her a receipt and never raise your voice here again." The landlord's bravado cracked for a second before greed overtook it. He snatched the envelope, nodding slowly. "Fine, but tell your friend to keep her payments on time." As he left, Adrian closed the door quietly and turned to Claire, whose face burned with anger and embarrassment. "You can't keep doing that," she said. "You can't fix everything with money." He exhaled slowly. "Would you rather I let him throw you out?" "I would rather my children see their mother stand on her own 2 feet." The words stung because they were true. Adrian's instinct to save had always been his armor, but maybe here it was also his flaw. He took a step closer, his voice softer. "Then let me help you find those feet again." Claire's shoulders slumped. "How?" "I'll get you a meeting at the Harbor View Hotel," he said. "They're hiring staff. I'll make an introduction, but you'll handle the rest. No favors, no strings." She studied him for a long moment, searching for hidden motives. But his eyes, steady, tired, sincere, held only truth. "All right," she whispered. "But if I fail on my own. You won't." 2 weeks later, Claire stood in front of the Harbor View's employee entrance in a freshly ironed blouse and borrowed heels. Her hands shook as she clutched her resume, typed neatly, printed on paper Adrian had insisted she use. She'd stayed up half the night rewriting it, making sure every word was hers. The HR manager, Margaret Holt, was brisk but kind. "Tell me about yourself, Ms. Bennett." Claire spoke plainly, about her years in hospital laundry, about her efficiency methods, about never missing a shift. She didn't mention Adrian. She didn't have to. When she finished, Margaret smiled. "You start Monday." "Housekeeping day shift," Claire almost cried. "Thank you," as she stepped outside. The cold air hit her face, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: stability. When Adrian arrived that evening with the twins' favorite strawberry tarts, she met him at the door, eyes shining. "I got the job." He smiled, a rare, genuine one. "I told you you would," Hazel squealed, throwing her arms around her mother. Grace clapped her hands, singing, "We can buy real cereal again." For the rest of the night, the little apartment glowed. The girls danced to music from a half-broken radio. Adrian fixed a leaking faucet while Claire chopped vegetables for dinner. Every sound, the laughter, the bubbling sauce, even the hiss of the stove, felt alive, like the world itself was finally breathing again. As he prepared to leave, Claire stopped him at the door. "You've done enough, Adrian. You can go back to your life now." He looked at her, quiet for a long moment. "Maybe I already am." But outside, under the streetlight, a shadow watched him go. The landlord, Victor Crane, leaned against his car, lighting a cigarette, eyes narrow and calculating. He'd seen the sleek car, the tailored coat, the easy confidence. Money like that didn't just drift into neighborhoods like this. He exhaled smoke into the damp air, muttering, "No one helps for free." The next morning, a letter slid under the Bennett's door. No name, just a sentence scrawled in ink. "You think kindness is free? Wait until it costs him everything." That night, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse, the city spread beneath him like a circuit board of light. His phone buzzed, a message from Ethan. "Board meeting tomorrow. Hanley's threatening to replace you if you miss another." He didn't reply. His eyes drifted to the paper bag on the counter. Bread, still warm from Sunrise Bakery. The same kind he'd bought that first morning. He thought about Claire's voice, the girls' laughter, the way the world had stopped feeling empty. And for the first time, he realized something terrifying. If he had to choose between the empire he built and the small family that made him feel human, again, he already knew which one he'd burn to the ground. He just didn't know someone else was already holding the match. The city was quieter than usual that evening, as if holding its breath before a storm. Portland's skyline shimmered under a cold dusk, the river reflecting the pale orange of streetlights, the hum of cars distant and dull. From the top floor of the Harborview Hotel, Adrian Miles stared down at it all. The world he once owned now felt small. For weeks, his life had narrowed to one small apartment, one family, and the sound of laughter that refused to leave his mind. But tonight that peace was about to fracture. He had just finished a call with his lawyer when Ethan entered, looking grim. "You need to see this," he said, tossing a folded newspaper onto the desk. Adrian's eyes flicked down to the headline, "Harborview CEO accused of charity scandal, secret payments to unknown family." His chest went cold. Below the title was a grainy photo, him leaving Claire's apartment, Hazel waving from the door. The image looked innocent enough, but to the world it would become something else. Suspicion, gossip, accusation. Ethan's voice was careful. "The board's furious. They're calling it a misuse of funds. Someone leaked this." Adrian closed the paper slowly. "Who?" Ethan hesitated. "We think it's the landlord, Crane. He's been spreading rumors, says you're hiding something. Claimed the Bennetts are a front for money laundering." Adrian's jaw tightened. "He wants money," Ethan nodded. "Or revenge." Adrian leaned back, the silence stretching thin. "Get me his address." Across town, Claire Bennett was folding laundry when a knock rattled the door. She froze. Hazel and Grace looked up from their coloring books. "Stay here," she said quietly, setting the basket aside. When she opened the door, Victor Crane stood in the hallway, a smirk twisting his lips. "Evening, Miss Bennett," she frowned. "What do you want?" "I hear your fancy friend's in trouble. Papers are saying he's been paying you off." Must be nice, huh? To have a millionaire playing savior. Get out. He took a step forward, voice lowering. You think people like him care about you? You're a story, Claire. Charity with a pretty face. And when it blows up, he'll walk away, and you'll be left holding the ashes. Leave, she said again, firmer this time. He smirked. You can't hide behind him forever. Everyone's got a price. The moment his hand brushed the doorframe, Claire slammed it shut. Her heart pounded as his footsteps faded down the hall. For the first time, fear replaced gratitude. When Adrian arrived an hour later, her hands were still shaking. What happened? He asked, seeing her pale. She hesitated, then handed him the note Crane had slipped under the door. You think kindness is free? Wait until it costs him everything. Adrian read it once, then tore it in half. His expression hardened, the businessman resurfacing beneath the man she'd come to know. He's not going to touch you again. Adrian. He turned toward the door. Stay with the girls. I'll handle this. Don't, she said quickly. Please, you can't solve everything by fighting it. Not this time. He stopped, eyes softening. I'm not fighting him, Claire. I'm ending what he started. By midnight, the rain had returned. Adrian found Victor Crane at a rundown bar near the river, nursing a drink, smirking when he saw him. Well, if it isn't the hero himself, Crane sneered. Come to buy your reputation back? Adrian sat across from him, calm but cold. How much? 10 grand to keep my mouth shut, Crane said, lighting a cigarette. 20 if you want me to forget those photos exist. Adrian's voice didn't rise. You've already sent them to the press, Crane grinned. Of course I did. But everything's negotiable. Adrian leaned forward, eyes sharp. You think blackmail makes you powerful? It doesn't. It just makes you disposable. Crane's grin faltered. You threatening me? No, Adrian said quietly. I'm giving you a chance to leave this city tonight. There's a check in my car, enough to start over somewhere else. Take it and disappear. Crane laughed. And if I don't? Adrian stood. Then I'll buy the building you own, evict you legally, and make sure your name's worth less than the dirt under my shoes. For a long moment, Crane said nothing. Then he spat on the floor. You're just another rich man pretending to be holy. Adrian's eyes darkened. No, I'm a man who finally understands what real worth is, and it isn't money. He turned and walked out into the rain, leaving Crane shouting after him. The next morning, reporters swarmed outside the hotel. Ethan had done damage control through the night, but rumors spread like wildfire. Billionaire's secret family. Hidden affair. Exploitation scandal. Adrian faced the board that afternoon. Cameras flashed as he entered the conference room, expression steady. One director snapped. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Yes, Adrian said calmly. It looks like I helped someone who needed it. And if that's a crime, then I'll accept the consequences. You could lose everything, another warned. Adrian gave a faint smile. Then maybe it's time I did. The silence that followed was heavier than any negotiation he'd ever led. By evening, he'd resigned. He handed the company over to Ethan with a quiet handshake. You'll run it better than I did. Ethan's voice broke slightly. Where will you go? Home, Adrian said simply. When he arrived at the Bennett's apartment that night, the girls ran into his arms. Claire stood behind them, unsure whether to scold or thank him. You saw the news, he said. She nodded. They're saying terrible things. He smiled faintly. Let them. Truth doesn't need an audience. Claire stepped closer. You gave up everything. He shook his head. I traded it. For what? For peace. Her eyes glistened. You didn't have to. I did, he said softly. Because for the first time, I'm not saving anyone. I'm choosing them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Hazel tugged his sleeve. Does this mean you're staying? He knelt, meeting her gaze. If your mom says I can? Claire laughed quietly through tears. We'll need more bread. Weeks passed. The newspaper frenzy faded, replaced by new scandals and louder headlines. The city moved on. But in a small apartment on the east side, life bloomed in simple, quiet ways. Claire's new job at Harbor View flourished. She was promoted to floor supervisor within a month. Hazel joined debate club. Grace began piano lessons with a borrowed keyboard. And Adrian, once the man who owned the skyline, spent his mornings fixing leaky faucets, helping with homework, and stopping by Sunrise Bakery every Sunday with a bag of warm loaves. Mr. Thompson, the baker, started something new that month. A glass jar by the register, labeled "Pay It Forward, bread for those in need." It filled faster than he could empty it. One morning, Claire found Adrian sitting by the window looking at the sunrise. "You miss it sometimes, don't you?" "The power, the company." He smiled. "Power's overrated. Bread smells better than boardrooms." She laughed softly. "You're impossible." He turned to her, serious now. "No, just finally free." Months later, a letter arrived at the bakery. It was postmarked from a small town in Idaho. Inside was a note from Victor Crane. "Found a job. Started over. Tell Miles I used his money for something real this time. See." Adrian read it once and tucked it away. No revenge. No gloating. Just quiet closure. That evening, as sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, Hazel and Grace helped set the table. Claire stirred pasta sauce on the stove. Adrian uncorked a cheap bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses. "Thursday dinner tradition," he said, smiling. Grace giggled. "You forgot the bread." He held up the bag. "Never." They laughed, ate, and lived. No cameras. No boardrooms. No headlines, just the hum of a family that had found each other by accident and built something deliberate. As dusk deepened, Hazel climbed onto the couch and handed him one of her school essays. It's called "The Man Who Bought Bread." He smiled, pretending not to tear up as he read. When he looked up, Claire was watching him, warmth in her eyes. "What's the ending?" she asked. He set the paper down gently. "The miracle wasn't the money," he said, voice low. "It was realizing that kindness, real kindness, changes everyone it touches." Outside, the city lights flickered like stars over the water. And in a small apartment that once knew only struggle, the sound of laughter rose again, soft but strong, proof that sometimes the impossible thing isn't wealth or power. It's finding the courage to love again,